I was asked a question quite early on in my career. Chris, do you think it's more important to be employed or employable?
Great question.
If you give a boy a fish, he feeds for a day. If you teach a boy to fish, he feeds for life. I always say to people when they bring me their solution, I go, what's the impact on the customer?
What would you say to leaders who pull away, decelerate, kick the can down the street, as opposed to leaning into conversations that need to be had?
Brutally, using the words of Jim Collins, addressing the brutal facts. You kick a can down the road, you don't care enough about the person. So don't tell me you care. Why don't you show me you care?
Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of The Life of a Business Leader. I am really excited for today's episode because I am joined by Chris Brindley. I will introduce Chris in a moment. Here's the title for today's session, just to get out the blocks fast. The Leadership Dilemma, Hard Skills. Do hard skills trump soft skills? That is what we're going to be talking about. And who better to talk about that subject than Chris Brindley? Chris and I were just talking before we came live. I've known Chris now Chris informs me, nearly 25 years. In fact, it's our 25th anniversary that we're coming up for. So, Chris, I am delighted to have you on The Life of a Business Leader. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Oysterman, and happy silver wedding.
Chris, some weddings don't last 25 years, and our relationship goes back 25 years. So I think that's amazing and testament to how aligned we've been over the years. And I know certainly a lot of my challenge comes from you, and you really energize and charge me. So I know before we even get started that our listeners are going to get so much value because of the subject that we're going to be talking about today and what you will bring to the party. So thank you.
And look, I think that first point is a real key learning point for everybody. The relationships are really important, and the relationships are based on trust. They're based on high support. They're based on high challenge. They're based about putting the other person's needs sometimes before your own. And I think ultimately when you talk about leadership, there's a great quote from Mark McCormack that says, when all things are equal, people do business with people they like and trust. He then goes on to say, when things are unequal, people still do business with people they like and trust. So ultimately, every business I've ever worked in is a people business. And as a leader, it's a privilege to be a leader. It's about just looking after your people and making sure that those people, whether you're your team or your customers, just get the best value from you as a leader.
And what a great way to kick off our session. And I think it's important that I just give a bit of context and framing, because for me, you really are an authority to be talking about this subject. You are a practitioner who's walked the talk for 3 decades now. You've been voted Britain's best boss. You've helped build some really innovative businesses and really made a difference. And now you spend your life coaching, exec coaching, being a NED, and helping clients to grow and scale their businesses and unlock leadership potential. So, Chris, my first question is, let's take this subject, the leadership dilemma. Do hard skills trump soft skills? Now, I know you and I spend a lot of time talking about this subject, but I think it's important that at the start we frame, what do we mean by hard skills versus soft skills? Because so many people have different definitions of that. So let's just frame that to start with, and then the rest of our conversation will have a clear structure and context and meaning to it.
Look, I think, again, you've raised a really key point early on. I think people look for clarity and consistency. And what I tend to find is lots of words get bandied about. And when I say, can you give me your definition of that? Actually, people just use inordinate amount of words, and there's no clarity or simplicity. So I hear the words hard skills and soft skills, and I sit there and say, well, why would you split them? What do you mean by that? You don't just mean skills. It's a bit people like when we talk about feedback. They go, oh, it's praise or constructive criticism. The brain doesn't process the word constructive. It just hears the word criticism. So I tend to use what feedback is about, giving people some information that will make them better at who they are and what they do. And it will reinforce really good practice and good behaviours, or enable people to listen to an alternative option about getting better in the future. So the hard skills, soft skills bit, I try and just give a little bit clearer in terms of my definition. So I would break it down as to, do you have the knowledge to do your job? If I ask you 10 questions, would you give me the right answers? The second question is, are you able to apply that knowledge in a skill-based situation, live with customers, to be able to be I call it a pracademic? Can you practically apply some of the academic rigor? And then the third bit is, can you talk to me about your personal qualities? And do you have personal qualities like commitment, resilience, self-awareness, flexibility? So I try to categorize it into knowledge, skill, and personal qualities.
Yeah.
What I look for in people is what is the requirement to do that job. So, for example, my brother's not well at the moment. He's got a brain tumor, and he's going to have to have an operation. I'm really clear. So if it broke down to technical skills and personal qualities, I'd want that brain surgeon to be 95% technical qualities, right, and 5% personal skills. Because if it was the other way around, I'd be concerned.
Yeah.
So what I try to do is look at different roles, and some roles require a greater level of technical skill, and actually some require a greater level of personal qualities. And they almost have a sliding scale of 1 to 100. And actually, I make it really personal and individual for the individual to say, this is the job requirement, this is where you are, this is where you might want to get to. And I tend to use the GROW model, which is, what do you want to achieve, which is the goal? What's the reality of where you are now? So what we then have is a performance gap. Then the O is the options to get from where you are now to where you want to be. And the W then really encapsulates those personal qualities, which is about what's your will or your level of desire to do the plan to get you from where you are now to where you want to get to. So I try and create a really personalized approach, but under the framework of, what knowledge do you need? What skill do you need? What personal qualities do you need? And then I look for people to have really consistent performance. And that's a correct and frequent practice, because that's what the best in business or the best in sport do.
Yeah, brilliant. No, and I'm on the same page. I always think about hard skills almost like the IQ, and the soft skills as being your EQ, the personal qualities. And I think just creating the difference. But I think it is important, Chris, that we help people get a frame on how in this conversation we are thinking about the two. Because the disruptive question at the front about the leadership dilemma, do hard skills trump soft skills? Your question, hard soft skills, are they taught or are they cultivated? Are they innate or are they learned?
Look, you're talking to somebody that didn't have a particularly successful time at school. So I'm always going to be on the bit of their learned skills. The question then, though, I think, is a slightly bit deeper one, which is, well, where do you learn? So you can learn from a book. Of course you can. You can learn from a podcast like this. But actually, you sometimes learn by doing. And it might not be that you were successful at the doing. So a lot of people, it's not win or lose. It's not fail. It's win or learn. Also, I've learned an awful lot from observing my peers, my bosses, my children. I look at behaviours. Behaviours are a really good indicator for me to enable me to learn. So whether it's congruent behaviour from a boss, the boss that says expenses, well, we can't afford to pay any, yet travels first class everywhere, or has a driver when a company's going through a cost crisis. So I think there's lots of different points where you can learn good behaviours and good technical skills. I think all senior leaders should have a coach or a mentor to be able to bounce ideas off stuff. So I think the deeper question is not whether it's innate or learned. It's about, how do I continue to learn? What's my approach to lifelong learning? Because new skills are required all the time in the modern workplace, whether that's technical skills or behavioural skills.
Yeah, you hit on an interesting point there about observing others. And would you agree that you can learn in equal measure? So behaviours that you see in others that you might want to emulate, but also when you see traits, like you mentioned there about the CEO who might be in a cost cutting for their business and yet goes and travels first class. You can learn as much in equal measure in terms of emulating behaviours, and also where you see behaviours that you don't want to be part of your leadership brand, if you use that expression. Would you subscribe to both those?
Absolutely, Royston. I do an exercise whereby I ask people to name the 3 people that have influenced them most in their life. And often you get mum and dad, which is why I ask for 3. Often it's a teacher or somebody else. And what often happens is, because I phrase the word influenced, people come back and say, let me tell you, my father or stepfather influenced me, not because they were good, but because they were awful. And as a result of that, or I had an awful boss, as a result of that, I was determined that if ever I became a parent, or if ever I became a leader, I'd almost do the exact opposite of what they did, because I know the impact it had on me. Therefore, it may well have the impact on others. So I think it is about the whole holistic experience, rather than I'll just copy what people do well. Sometimes avoid what people do badly.
And going back to your example, because I want to go back to that question around, are they innate or learned or taught or cultivated? Because your example with your brain surgeon and somebody operating on your brother, you'd want them to have the 95% technical skills. I mean, those hard skills, you go to university, you achieve mastery over those, and the hard skills, whether it's strategy or the technical expertise that you do, that is absolutely, you can consume, learn, absorb all of that. But ring fencing the soft skills for a moment. Do you think you can learn all those soft skills, or do you think people can have some of those natural emotional intelligence skills, natural authentic leaders? Can that be part of your DNA?
Look, I'm pretty sure it can. My experience is, though, I still look to learn about creating energy, about energizing others. I remember my first keynote speech, Royston, and the feedback I got from a boss was well read. Well, funnily enough, I don't think that was a compliment. So as a result of that feedback, I made a decision. I was 22 at the time, that I would go away and learn how to be a good presenter. Now, if you went back to my school days, my teacher's report said, Chris needs to stop talking in class too much and start learning. So I was a natural speaker, but what I didn't have was structure. I didn't have some of the knowledge and techniques of being a good speaker. I didn't have the skill in terms of timing, perhaps in storytelling, using pictures, all of that. So, but I was a natural talker, but actually what the learned skill gave me was structure, gave me a framework to use some of my innate skills, but use them well. So that for me is still going down I'm always learning to be better. I wouldn't get complacent that says I'm a natural. I don't think I am a natural. I think I've got to work and look for the marginal gains about being better, who I am and what I'm doing. I'm 60 in a couple of months, but I still look to every day to be better at who I am, to look to do everything I do 1% better rather than one thing 100% better.
There's a thread that you're drawing out there, Chris, to me, though, that 60 years of age, you've still got that growth mindset. And everything you've talked about for the last 5 minutes leads me to that conversation about the fixed versus growth mindset. Yeah. If you've got a growth mindset and you've got that mentality of, it's not just you learn when you go through formal education, every day is a lifelong learning experience, then surely that's a key part. You've got to be in the right state of mindset every single day.
Look. If I go back to when I grew up, the world is fundamentally different. It's fundamentally different from a technology point of view. I still used. I didn't even have a calculator when I was growing up at school. We had to do long multiplication and long division. I'm deadly serious, right? So the point is now I can use an Excel spreadsheet as well as anybody. So we've had a technology revolution, and we will still continue to have a technology revolution. We've had a consumer revolution. When I grew up, we only had shops, and they shut half day Wednesday, half day Saturday, all day Sunday. And the only other place you could buy any items was a catalogue. Catalogue for poor people, because you spread the cost over 26, 52 or 104 weeks. So, but I look at the consumer revolution today, and you see things around people paying £5, £6 for a cup of coffee. You see they're going to, people are vegan. If I go on a flight anywhere in the world, there will be a vegan option. 20 years ago, that just did not exist. The fact that when I grew up, we had takeaways. Now people don't go and take away. Actually, people sit at home and use the technology on their phone to order an Uber Eats or a Deliveroo or Just Eat. They buy insurance from a meerkat, right? A stuffed toy. Well, it's not a meerkat. It's called aggregation. So the whole way of consumer thinking in terms of time as a valuable commodity of money, all of those I wasn't born with, but because I know the world is a changing place, and if I look at the world order, it's changed now in terms of the way people think, the way employers behave and act, whether that's working from home, whether that's mental well-being, all of that stuff. I wasn't born with that. But if I know the world is going to change, I've got a choice. Either I can embrace that change and get ahead of that curve, or it will define me. And I don't want anything to define my future. I want to be in control of my future. Therefore, I take personal responsibility for making sure that I spend enough time every week looking into the future. I subscribe to futurists. Tom Cheesewright is a brilliant one. Graham Codrington, Steve the Ball Futurist Brown. They spend their weeks looking into the future, whether that's the workplace of the future, whether that's the consumer theory of the future, whether that's the big organizational theory. So why wouldn't I subscribe to one of their weekly newsletters so I can learn from them? This podcast is a great example of learning. So I always set time aside every week, really clear time that cannot be interrupted by anybody for me. Because I was asked a question quite early on in my career. Chris, do you think it's more important to be employed or employable?
Great question.
And a lot of people still think it's employed. The answer is your employment can end through no fault of your own. The question then is, are you employable? Because if you're employable, I think you've got a job for life. So that bit about continuing to develop new skills, flexibility, cognitive thinking, understanding that people now, younger people in particular, have very different views to me. So I don't want to sit there and say, well, in my day, what I want to say is, what makes you say that? Please help me what you're thinking, feeling, seeing, because it might be different, because you've grown up in a new world. Therefore, I can't think like an 18-year-old. So I just need to ask an 18-year-old how they think.
Great point. So the first key action, because I like to make the life of a business leader really practical, the way I'm interpreting that is that your relevance as a leader today is in direct proportion to the size of your growth mindset and the way that you never stop learning. The day you stop learning is the day you stop earning. The day you stop learning is the day you might be employed, for picking up your point that you make, but are you employable? So I really like that whole relevance and that growth mindset and making sure that you're set up for success.
And Royston, it's not just from a personal level. I think it's from a corporate level. I show a slide in which I ask people to pay our respects to our dear departed friends. And on that, I show logos like Blockbuster, like Thomas Cook, like Kodak, like Nokia, Woolworths. All of those were leading organizations in their chosen industry. I don't care how old you are or when you were founded or how good you used to be. The question for business is, will I still be credible and relevant and add value in the future? And either organizations or individuals, if you're not prepared to learn new stuff to add value in the future, don't be surprised if you end up like Blockbuster, which went from 16,000 stores worldwide to one. And that is the Blockbuster Museum. I never want to be an old relic and never want any of my old businesses to be museums.
Oh, see, I knew this was going to be fun today. I knew we were going to bounce. And we've only got 45 minutes today, but I know when we get into conversation, Chris, we could just talk for hours. But I hope our listeners are feverishly making notes because there's so many golden nuggets that are coming out here. I too use those those slides, and it's so true. Chris, bringing us back to the hard soft skills, is there anything about, because we could have listeners who are aspiring to be leaders,
Yeah.
We could have CEOs of major organizations. We could have middle managers, first level managers. I know our audience is vast that listen to the life of a business leader. Is there anything about the blend of hard and soft skills that, depending where you're at on your leadership journey, whether you manage 1 or 1,000 people, that the focus changes in terms of, you know, your defaults to more of the hard skills versus soft skills?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if I go back to my first day at work, which was printing checkbooks for a retail bank, I'm pretty sure I got paid that day for my hands. Funny enough, what I started to get paid more for as I learned more, got bigger opportunities to work more on the strategic thinking, is I started to get paid more for my brains than my hands. Therefore, I needed to learn. So if I look at a CEO or an MD, I was the MD of a retail bank. I had 5,000 people in the team. I had 535 retail stores. During my 7 years as the MD, I never served a customer once on the counter. You know what? As the MD, I was responsible for every transaction, every minute of every day in those stores. And I had to achieve it through others. So therefore, my skill set wasn't, I try and serve every customer physically. I couldn't serve every customer in one branch, never mind over 500. So then it becomes about critical thinking, not just about the doing. So of course, as your roles change, that sliding scale between personal qualities and technical skills will change. And therefore, it is about learning different balancing skills as you go on further in your career. So for me, I think it's the role of your boss and the role of yourself to sit down regularly, talk about where your flight path is going in terms of your future skill set, and then actually have a really good pathway and plan to deliver that.
And would you say that there are leaders that aspire to be leaders like you were, the MD of a huge team, but they can't get out of the comfort zone of doing the doing and defaulting back to their, you know, technical skills and maybe the hard skills?
Yeah.
What would you say to those people who really struggle to make that transition?
I think they need to stop being the spider's web, because you only need one spider to weave a web. But when the spider leaves that web, it falls into disrepair. So in transactional analysis, the leader that does everything for the team is known as the contented state. Why? Because it gets done. But it just means the leader's really, really busy, and therefore he's working in the business and not on the business. For me, some of the senior leaders in business don't need to be worrying about yesterday's results or tomorrow's results. They need to be planning for the results in 12, 24, and 36 months' time.
Yeah.
Also, if you really care about your people, you will grow them by giving them some ability to do your current work. That gives them growth opportunities and gets them ready for the future. It also creates capacity for you as the leader, means that you can start doing more thinking and less doing. And one exercise I ask people to consider, Oyster, is I ask people to look at their calendars or daily or weekly or monthly activities, and ask them to write those activities down on one of 3 coloured post-it notes. Red, I'm the only person that can do that. Amber, I'm doing it at the moment, but I know with the right amount of coaching, somebody else in my team would be able to do that for me. Green, I don't need to do this. Anybody could do it. Why am I doing it? And that's when you get rid of the green stuff to others now to create capacity. You have a development plan for your individuals to grow them so they can be your successor. And the red bit over time, that's when you give some of your talent to start testing them as to whether or not they're ready to step into your shoes, whether that's for a meeting, whether that's whilst you're on holiday, or longer term. Because when I was a senior leader, I always used to say to every one of my team that knocked on my door and said, "Boss, I want a bigger job," I says, "Come back and see me when you've got your replacement ready."
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. I was doing a coaching session last week and building on the theme that you're talking about, because you've sparked me with two questions. And one of the things I said to this guy I was coaching last week, who's just moved into a senior role, was, how long before you could go and take a 6-month sabbatical, go away for 6 months and come back and the business is run well without you? Because if you had that as a mindset, as a unifying North Star in terms of how you think about what you do and how you set the business up for success, then how long will it be, the timeline, before you can get to that point?
I mean, absolutely spot on. I mean, I listen to people come back and say, Chris, I've just come back from 2 weeks holiday. I wish I'd never have gone. And I said, why? Oh, the amount of work I've come back to. And I said, who do you think's responsible for that?
Yeah.
Because I don't know many people that book a fortnight off the night before they go. I know a lot of people who plan the holidays. So if you planned a holiday in 6 months' time, what's your responsibility for getting people in your team ready to represent you whilst you're on holiday? Because if you plan effectively and actually ensure people get experiences of the events that they're going to represent you at before they go in here, there's a fair chance they'll perform better than if you just drop them in it without proper planning. As a result of that, it's just a concept of, if you give a boy a fish, he feeds for a day. If you teach a boy to fish, he feeds for life. You know, that's a Greek proverb. And it's all about teaching others to grow new skills. And you will benefit as a leader because they'll be able to take some work off you. Not because you're lazy, it's because then you get the opportunity to start using your brains on the business and not your hands.
Yeah. And it's really interesting. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about a CEO who used to be your former business, NatWest, when Stephen Hester took over.
Yeah.
And this leader was sharing with me that he used to go into Stephen Hester's office sometimes, and Stephen Hester would just be sat there, and he'd say to him, "What are you doing?" He said, "I've just spent 2 hours thinking." And you made a really interesting point earlier about, you know, the job of senior leaders is not so much the here and now, because the here and now should be taking care of itself. It's their ability to be able to shape tomorrow, 6 months, 12 months. And I get that in a big business. If you're CEO of NatWest, like a Stephen Hester, who has a whole leadership team and structure of teams and people that are there. My challenge is that a lot of people who will follow and listen to the life of a business leader will be owner-managed, entrepreneurial businesses where they're having to take care of the here and now, and they're having to find time to do the future-proofing for tomorrow. How does that owner-manager get the time to be able to compartmentalize and make time to do both? Because so many of them are so busy on the dance floor of the businesses, Chris. How do we give them ideas today to give them structure about how they can manage that challenge?
All right, let me be pretty hard in the challenge here. Right, you've got 24 hours today. I've got 24 hours today. Any of your listeners have got 24 hours a day. Even if we have a change of government in the UK this year, they physically can't say, oh, we're going to award everybody a 36-hour day and a 9-day week because we think all of you are busy. It ain't going to happen. So if you can't control time, guess what? It's really clear in my mind. You are responsible for the activities you do in the time allowed. So here's what I want people to think about. How do you consume time? And how do people around you consume your time? I'm really clear. When people tell me they're busy, I sit and watch them. And I can usually save them a load of time. People waste time. They watch shit TV, right? They get distracted by others. They have no structure for interruptions, right? They're always on the phone when it pings. So take some personal responsibility for making sure you don't waste time. And Royston, you did a brilliant post the other week that says, I can save everyone time, stop having 1 hour meetings, start having 45-minute meetings. Yeah. Well, that'll save you 25% time. Secondly, don't allow people to waste your time. You wouldn't let them steal your money, so don't let them steal your time. I do not allow people to interrupt me unnecessarily. So I say to people, can you show me some courtesy? Because if I've not got a meeting, it doesn't mean I'm not working. It might be I'm thinking. As a result of that, if you interrupt me, it'll take me on average and this is absolutely science-based, 17 minutes to get back to the point where I was before the interruption.
Yeah.
Therefore, if I get 4 interruptions a day, I've lost an hour.
Yeah.
Secondly, and finally, it's just around putting in structure. I call my thinking time goal time. It's the most important appointment of the week after my time with my loved ones, and it can't be interrupted. So if you don't let people steal your money, don't let them steal your time, focus on the right things, and look to organise yourselves better, because the best leaders organise themselves before they organise others.
Love it. Love it. And do you actually block that? Did you call it gold time or gold time?
Gold time.
Do you actually block that in your diary as a meeting?
2 hours.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Because that's the difference, isn't it?
Of course it is. And I have a model week. I am that structured. So when I was working in banking, funnily enough, not many customers wanted to see me at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. The last thing they wanted. Why? Because they were dealing with the shit that happened over the weekend. So I knew I wouldn't be seeing customers on a Monday morning between 9 and 12. So that's when I got other stuff done. I also knew that every Tuesday and every Thursday, that would be my time to go and see customers. I also knew that Wednesday morning would be the time I looked at my next 3 weeks' diary and started to book that time out with clients. And it'd be 25% full for the following week, for the 3 weeks' time, 50% for 2 weeks, and full next week. If I had a full customer diary on a Tuesday and a Thursday, I'd hit my targets. Wednesday morning, therefore, was phone club. Wednesday afternoon was goal time. Thursday morning was customers. Friday morning was complete the admin and all the work that needs doing to get others to serve the customer. And then Friday afternoon, I did networking. And as a result of that, when I went in on the Monday, I usually had some pieces of business waiting for me. It is about structure and discipline as a leader. I appreciate you can get distracted. But let's remember, you've got to stop others distracting you. And one of the ways to do that for me, Royston, as a leader, is never let people bring you a problem. Now, when I say that, people say, oh, that's really poor leadership, Chris. People should always be able to come to you with the problems. I say, no, reframe this. Why don't you ask them to bring you solutions rather than problems? Because if you get people to bring you solutions, number one, you also know that they've given it some thought. Secondly, if they own the solution that they come up with, it usually happens. If all they ever do is come to you with a problem and you answer it, guess what? You're going to be really busy as a leader because they only need one phone number in life, yours. They do not grow. So have a solutions, not problems approach with anybody in your team.
And that's about building the thinking capability in your people, isn't it? Now, Jackie, who runs our Leadership Academy, always used to have this great expression where she said, when you did your maths exam when you were at school, the mark was split 2 ways. 2/3 of the mark was for the working out and 1/3 was for the answer. Yep. And your point's absolutely right there. If people keep bringing you the problem, what they're not doing is doing the working out. Whereas if you say, bring me a problem and bring me either 1 or 2 or 3 solutions, then you're forcing and challenging them to do that critical thinking, which is to do the working out, and then you build capability in others.
To help listeners go, well, what do you mean? I always say to people when they bring me their solution, I go, what's the impact on the customer? What's the impact on your team and the wider team that have to implement the solution with you? Thirdly, what's the impact on the business in the short, medium and long term? And funnily enough, they sort of know then how to frame the solutions to me. They go, Chris, this is a solution. I've given it some thought. This is how it'll impact the customer. It will set a precedent. It won't set a precedent. It will do this. It won't do that. Great. This is what I need from the team if I do that solution. Or if I do the other solution, I'll need them to do that. And actually, the business will have to take a bit of a hit, but it's the right thing to do. Or it'll actually benefit us in the long term because actually it means that we'll get some good PR or something like that. As a result of that, I'm training them to think.
Yes.
Right? So therefore, eventually, you know what they do? They go, I'm going to phone Chris with my solution. Right, what's he going to ask me? Customer, colleague, teammate, business. Right.
Yeah.
I don't need to ring him because I know what he's going to say is which is the best option and I'll back you.
Yeah.
So they start then learning how to think, critically think independently. And that's when I can go on holiday. That's when I can have a 6 month sabbatical, but know that I'll come back to a really good business.
Yeah. Love it, love it, love it. I've got another question for you, and I want to throw this question at you because there's one lesson very early in our 25-year relationship that always sticks out for me having a conversation with you. And it aligns to this expression: people don't care what you know until you know that you care. And I just want you to talk about your kind of unifying guiding principle as a leader about people not missing sports days, school plays, parents' evenings. Just because I talk about it and I reference you all the time when I talk about that, but I know that'd be really valuable for our listeners.
Okay. Look, so if I put it in context, I think it's important that it's in context. Because I wasn't very good at school, but I adored sport. Both my primary school teacher and my secondary school head teacher both gave me some careers advice. And it was, don't try and be an accountant, don't try and be a lawyer, don't try and be an engineer. Academically, Chris, you're not motivated to do that. So what we have identified, though, is through sport, you've got some really good personal qualities. You've learned how to communicate, you've learned how to problem solve, you understand teamwork and bringing people together. And they recommended that I, at the age of sort of 16, 17, 18, I spend a bit more time learning leadership than perhaps physics, chemistry and biology. And actually, as a result of that, Royston, I started to fall in love with leadership, whether that was military leadership, business leadership, sports leadership. And what was clear for me after reading all those books was the very best leaders had real clarity of purpose. They had a mission, a vocation, whatever you want to call it, a North Star. So I wrote mine down 4 years ago. And it was, I want to be known, my eulogy, as somebody who consistently delivers outstanding results and develop winners in life. Under that statement, there was 3 pictures. Somebody crossing the line first. I like to win because it sets standards, but I like to win the right way. The third one was 3 arrows in the bullseye because I'm obsessed with getting it right first time, every time. Because as you know, we shared a story many years ago that if I was happy with 99% success rate as a parachute packer, that wouldn't be very helpful to the 1% of people that jumped out of planes because I hadn't measured twice and cut once. And then actually the third picture is somebody at the top of a mountain helping somebody else further down the mountain up, because I think that's what leaders do. So as a result of that, I then started to think about some of the critical activities I needed to do throughout my leadership career. And actually, if I'm going to develop winners in life, I want to know what the individual motivations are for people in my team. And when I started speaking to parents, when I got the job as MD at NatWest, people started to talk about the frustration of not being allowed to watch their children in sports days and nativity plays. You only get a few years at those. It's probably primary school. I don't think you go to the nativity play at secondary school or sports day. So if you've got a 5 or 6 year window, I made a conscious decision to ensure that anybody who wanted to go to those, they could go and have that 100% record. Because I think when a child is at a nativity play or a sports day, they're probably looking for 1 or 2 faces in the audience. Well, that's the faces of the people that they love. So I made that decision. And to be honest, Royston, it shouldn't be a difficult one. Most things are a function of good planning and organisation. So I'm going to make a big prediction for your listeners. I think this year's nativity plays are going to be in December.
Brilliant.
So this conversation is in May. So if somebody tells me they can't think already about how to allow people to have sports day in the next couple of months and nativity play in 6 months, then you probably just need to sit down, have some goal time, get your team together and says, what matters most to us in our lives as well as our work, and how can we look after each other to make sure that we have a fulfilling home life, a fulfilling work life. And if you're in sales listening to this, one of the things I used to get frustrated at is when people would say to me, oh, Chris, my sales numbers were good for the last few weeks because it was Easter. And I'd go, what? Is Easter a new concept? Because fully enough, it's been around for a couple of 1,000 years. So if you know Easter's coming, why don't you get your sales activity to a level whereby you know you've got 2 4-day weeks coming? And sometimes people just have to look into the future. And that for me is what we've talked about, whether it's hard skills, soft skills, whatever you want to call it. The very best leaders spend a lot of time looking into the future, understanding the trends and getting ready for the future. Because the one thing I point out is that is where we're going to spend the rest of our lives.
You're only ever as good as what you do tomorrow.
Absolutely. Nobody cares how good they used to be.
No. Listen, we've got 10 minutes left, and I want to take you on an angle because I want to see if this chimes and resonates with you, aligned to the soft skills. And this could be a whole session in itself, Chris, and we might need to do another episode of the Life Business Leaders to do this one and just share some conversation thoughts on it. But one of the things I'm really experiencing, and I've seen a lot of this year, is where people are not leaning in to conversations which need to be had, and instead they kick the can down the street. Now, you come from an environment, particularly with all the sport that you've done. You're a chair of Rugby League World Cup 2021. You do a phenomenal amount of work in sport, which, of course, is that elite high-performance environment. I know you talk about performance cultures and performance environments. What would you say to leaders who pull away, decelerate, kick the can down the street, as opposed to leaning into conversations that need to be had?
Brutally, using the words of Jim Collins, addressing the brutal facts. If you kick a can down the road, you don't care enough about the person that you want the conversation with. You just don't care. So don't tell me you care. Why don't you show me you care? Because I only look for people's actions rather than people's words. And if you take the sporting analogy, there's a great story by one of our most decorated Paralympic swimmers, a guy called Mark Woods. He was being filmed by his biomechanics team. Mark was looking to become a multiple gold medal winner in the Paralympics for numerous times. Mark got his feedback after 7 weeks. And he asked a simple question. Do you think you've helped me get closer to a gold medal by telling me I could have been doing better over the last 7 weeks? Why did you leave it so long? Because if you take sport, and it applies equally in business, feedback is a gift and it doesn't cost money. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. Telling me I'm doing it well reinforces my self-belief, my self-esteem, my self-confidence. So please catch me doing it right, as well as care enough about me to tell me when I could be doing it better. But will you tell me immediately? That means I can change the behaviour. It will help me. It will help you. It'll help the organisation. So often people kick the can down the road because they lack either the skill or the confidence to have that conversation. So let's go back to learn skills. It is a skill to use a tool that can be dangerous if used in the wrong hands with somebody who's not been trained up to use it. And that's why I think when we talk about conversations that need a high level of challenge, people step away from that because they lack that confidence and actually they've not built up the skill. And I always talk about golf at this moment, Royston. When I speak to golfers, either amateur or professional, there's one club in the bag they hope they never have to use, and it's the sandwich, because nobody drives to the bunker on purpose. The difference is a professional golfer, even though they never want to use the tool, are mastered the tool. As a result of that, if they ever get in that situation, they don't shy away from it, they deal with it. And I've seen some amazing play, even last night in the championship, PGA championship, of people getting in the bunker doing the most amazing shots. Yeah. So I talk about mastery. So therefore, I've mastered how to have difficult conversations. I use the pro model. A position statement, listen to the response, establish ownership. I like doing pro statements. Why? Because I care enough about the individual to make them better at who they are and what they do. Because what's the alternative? Let's say I kick it down the road for 4 years. I never say a word to them. I never give them feedback. And eventually I make a redundancy program. And I call them in and I tell them I'm going to make them redundant. And they ask me the question, boss, is there anything you could have done to help me earlier? Oh yeah, I think you've been shit for the last 4 years, but I just didn't care about you to tell you. So that's not leadership. That's abdication. So
Yeah.
I think it goes back to what's the skill I need to learn to be a better leader? And, leadership isn't about giving sweets out all the time. It's occasionally grasping the nettle. But grasping the nettle takes a bit of courage, a lot of skill, and a lot of practice. And that for me is mastery. And I always use Matthew Syed's book, Bounce, as my go-to reading alongside Your Rise and Build to Grow. So there are tools out there to help everybody. But you've got to care enough about any individual that says, I've seen your behaviour, it needs to be better, I'm going to have the conversation. Because I bet as a parent, you wouldn't let a child go and be a danger to themselves or a danger to others. You'd give them feedback immediately.
Yeah, great analogy. And Chris, I mean, we could spend so much time talking about this. On the premise that success in life is 80% psychology and mindset and 20% skill, is there anything about how you frame it in your mind? Because I think too many leaders have a negative association with delivering meaningful feedback because they care. And you framed it up with caring, but in my mind, the moment you say, and you did use the word that, this is going to be a difficult conversation or a challenging conversation. The moment you say it's going to be a difficult or a challenging conversation, you've already put yourself on the back foot because it's going to be a difficult, challenging conversation. Is there anything about how you create a trigger or an association that when you want to deliver some developmental feedback, that in your mind you frame it in a different way, that's then going to put you on the front foot?
Yeah, and part of that is learning the tools and the skills to ask questions like, Royston, would you like to be better at who you are and what you do? If I could make you better at your job today, would you be interested in listening to me? And it's all about yes, right? So if I could tell you the 5 things you do really well, would you be interested? If I could tell you there's 2 areas that I think you could be better at that would enhance your career prospects and make you more employable in the future, either inside or outside this organisation, would you be interested? And that's learning those open questions. And as your old boss, Peter Thompson, used to say, always look to ask yes tag questions where people say the answer is yes. Now, that's about thinking how you frame things. And if I use sport and business, Royston, for any meeting, in sport, a professional athlete will always warm up, will always have a real strategy for peak performance, will always warm down, and they'll always have quality recovery time. I think that same model applies to any business. How well do you warm up ahead of any meeting?
Yeah.
How do you look at peak performance and how do you have a strategy for dealing with that peak performance? In warming down, it's about what actions do you need to take following the meeting to ensure you get the best outcome following the meeting. And actually QRT is quality recovery time to make sure that you don't have back-to-back meetings and therefore you end the day exhausted with a full list of action points to send around the world when you put the kids to bed and you've had your tea. So I think it is about preparation.
Yeah.
The better the preparation, I often find, the better the peak performance. As a result of that, you'll get better outcomes.
Love it. I want to circle right back into the title of our session as we close out. The leadership dilemma, do hard skills trump soft skills? So if you were given a succinct answer to that question, what would be your answer, yes or no, and why?
It's a blend. You need personal qualities, technical skills, but you need to multiply that by habit. Habit is correct and frequent practice. Doing it right once every 10 years ain't going to enable you to have muscle memory to continue to do that like a peak performer. Doing it wrong doesn't help either. If you're doing it wrong and you're doing it wrong frequently, then we'll have a very different conversation.
Love it. What a great session. I'm absolutely convinced that there will be golden nuggets that our listeners have taken away. So, Chris, thank you so much for being on The Life of a Business Leader. If people want to get hold of you, how do they get hold of you? Because I'm sure there'll be people going, I want more of Chris Brindley.
I actively encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn. All I ask for, though, is to avoid time wasters, is can you do me a message that says, I listened to the podcast, I'd love to connect. Thanks, Chris. Because I do get a lot of people that want to waste my time on LinkedIn, and therefore I just want to be able to triage it. So I'd love people to connect on LinkedIn. If you want to ask me any more questions or any podcast or book recommendations apart from yours, of course, Royston, and I'll happily deliver that.
Brilliant. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. If you like what you've heard down the Life of Business Leader, make sure you share it. Our goal and mission is to get this out to as many leaders so that we can help leaders to be the best versions of themselves that they can be. So for me, Royston Guest, the host, until next time, goodbye for now.